The silence in Courtroom 3B was so complete that Detective Sarah Chen could hear her own heartbeat thundering against her ribs. Judge Patricia Hawthorne's gavel had fallen moments ago, and now the packed gallery held its collective breath as the jury foreman stood with the verdict in his trembling hands. In the matter of the State versus Marcus Williams, on the charge of first-degree murder, we find the defendant. That's when Rex barked. The sound exploded through the courthouse like a gunshot, deep, urgent, and absolutely forbidden. The German, Shepard, who had been lying quietly at Sarah's feet in the front row, suddenly lunged to his feet, his powerful frame rigid with tension. His amber eyes weren't fixed on the jury or the defendant. They were locked on someone else entirely, someone in the gallery. "Order!" Judge Hawthorne's voice cracked like a whip. "Officer Chen, control your animal immediately." But Rex wasn't finished. The war-scarred K9, whose decorated career had spanned 8 years and countless drug busts, missing person searches and bomb threats, had never, not once, disobeyed a direct command to stay quiet. Now he was pulling against his lead with a strength that made Sarah's shoulder socket scream, his paws scraping against the polished marble floor as he tried to reach someone in the third row. "Rex, down! Stay!" Sarah's command came out sharper than intended, born of embarrassment and confusion. This wasn't like him. Rex had attended dozens of court proceedings, had sat through testimony about the most horrific crimes imaginable without so much as a whimper. He was a professional, trained to perfection, disciplined beyond question. The defendant, Marcus Williams, a soft-spoken insurance adjuster accused of murdering his wife, turned in his chair to stare at the disruption. His court-appointed attorney, a nervous young man named Timothy Brooks, was frantically shuffling papers and whispering apologies to the bench. The prosecutor, District Attorney Rebecca Morse, looked ready to object to the very existence of dogs in her courtroom. But Rex wasn't looking at any of them. His entire focus remained fixed on a middle-aged woman in a grey wool coat, sitting in the third row with her purse clutched to her chest like armor. Mrs. Eleanor Pemberton, according to the witness list, Marcus Williams' next-door neighbor, the woman who had called 911 on the night of the murder after hearing terrible screaming from the Williams house. Rex's bark turned into something deeper, more primal, a growl that seemed to come from his very soul. Officer Chen, Judge Hawthorne's, patience had evaporated entirely. "Remove that animal from my courtroom this instant, or I'll hold you in contempt." Sarah felt every eye in the room boring into her as she struggled with Rex's lead. The dog was 90 pounds of pure muscle and determination, and something had triggered every instinct he possessed. In 8 years of partnership, she'd learned to trust those instincts. They'd saved her life more than once, but this made no sense. "I'm sorry, Your Honor. I don't care if he's never." The judge's face was flushed with anger. "This is a murder trial, not a dog show. Get him out of here before I have you both arrested for disruption of justice." As Sarah finally managed to drag Rex toward the courtroom doors, she caught a glimpse of Mrs. Pemberton's face. The woman had gone pale as cemetery marble, and her hands were shaking so violently that her purse fell to the floor, its contents spilling across the aisle. Rex saw it too. His growl intensified, and he lunged one more time toward the woman before. Sarah could muscle him through the double doors and into the hallway beyond. The last thing Sarah heard before the doors slammed shut was the jury foreman's voice, finally continuing with the verdict that would either free Marcus Williams or send him to death row. But outside in the echoing corridor, surrounded by portraits of long-dead judges and the lingering scent of floor wax and fear, Sarah Chen stared down at her partner and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the courthouse's aggressive air conditioning. Rex had stopped struggling. He sat perfectly still now, his ears forward, his breathing steady. But his eyes, those intelligent amber eyes that had seen too much death and violence and human cruelty, were fixed on the courtroom doors with an intensity that made Sarah's skin crawl. Something was wrong, terribly fundamentally wrong, and somehow Rex knew exactly what it was. 3 years earlier, Kandahar province, Afghanistan. The IED explosion had torn through the morning air like the fist of an angry god, turning Sergeant Sarah Chen's world into a symphony of ringing ears and copper-tasting blood. When the dust settled and the screaming began, she found herself pinned beneath twisted metal and debris, her left leg bent at an angle that made her stomach lurch. That's when she first saw Rex. He came through the smoke like a phantom, his black and tan coat dusty with concrete powder, and his amber eyes scanning the wreckage with professional intensity. The 2-year-old German Shepherd was attached to Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, a dog handler from the 89th Military Police Brigade, and he was working the blast site with methodical precision. But when Rex reached Sarah's position, something changed. He stopped his search pattern and sat down beside her, his warm body pressed against her shoulder. His nose touched her face gently, once, twice, and then he let out a soft whine that somehow cut through the chaos better than any human voice could have. "Easy, girl," Rodriguez called out as he jogged over, medic kit in hand. "Rex doesn't usually break protocol like that. You must be special." Sarah would later learn that Rex had been specially trained to detect not just explosives and drugs, but the chemical signatures of severe internal bleeding and shock. Her spleen had been ruptured by a piece of shrapnel, and without immediate medical attention, she would have bled out within the hour. The medic said later that they might not have prioritized her case. Her external injuries looked relatively minor compared to some of the others. If Rex hadn't insisted on staying by her side, the dog had literally saved her life by breaking the rules. 2 weeks later, when Rodriguez was killed by a sniper while on patrol, Rex became inconsolable. The normally disciplined K9 refused to eat, wouldn't respond to commands from other handlers, and spent his days lying beside Rodriguez's empty bunk, whimpering softly. The base veterinarian recommended that Rex be retired from active duty. His psychological bond with his handler had been too strong, and now that it was severed, he might never be reliable in the field again. That's when Sarah, still recovering from her own injuries and facing a medical discharge, made a request that surprised everyone, including herself. She wanted to adopt Rex. The paperwork took months to complete. Military working dogs weren't typically released to former soldiers unless they were deemed unfit for further service. But Rex's case was unique. He was grieving, traumatized, and slowly wasting away despite the best care the Army could provide. When Sarah finally received permission to take him home to Portland, Oregon, both of them were shadows of their former selves. The transition wasn't easy. Sarah's physical therapy was grueling, and her nightmares came every night like clockwork. Rex had his own demons. He would pace the small apartment for hours, checking and rechecking doors and windows, alert to threats that existed only in his memory. Some nights Sarah would wake to find him standing guard over her bed, his body tense with hypervigilance. But slowly, carefully, they healed each other. Sarah enrolled in the police academy as soon as her doctors cleared her for active duty. Rex underwent extensive retraining to adapt his military skills to civilian law enforcement. They learned to trust again, to work as a team again, to find purpose in protecting people who had never seen war but faced dangers just as real. By the time they graduated from the Portland Police Bureau's K9 program, Rex had become something more than just a working dog. He was Sarah's anchor, her early warning system, her reminder that some bonds transcend species and circumstance. When her PTSD threatened to drag her under, Rex would sense the panic attack coming and position himself where she could feel his steady breathing, his unshakable presence. When Rex's training instincts kicked in, Sarah had learned to listen. Always. Present day. Portland Police Bureau, Southeast Precinct. "You sure you're okay, Chen?" Detective Marcus Webb looked up from his case files as Sarah led Rex through the bullpen toward their shared desk. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Sarah collapsed into her chair, Rex immediately taking his usual position beside her feet. The courtroom incident had been 3 hours ago, but she still felt unsettled. The jury had returned a guilty verdict. Marcus Williams would spend the rest of his life in prison for the murder of his wife. Justice had been served, the case was closed, and yet Rex acted weird in court today, she said, absently scratching behind the dog's ears. Really weird. He's never done anything like that before. Webb, a 20-year veteran with the patience of a saint, and the intuition of a fortune-teller, set down his coffee mug and gave her his full attention. Weird how? He went after a witness. Well, not after her exactly, but he was fixated on this woman, Eleanor Pemberton, the neighbor who called in the domestic disturbance. He wouldn't stop barking at her, wouldn't respond to commands. Judge, Hawthorne threw us out. Pemberton, Webb mused, pulling up the case file on his computer. Yeah, I remember her testimony. Pretty straightforward. Heard screaming around 11 p.m., called 911, stayed inside until the uniforms arrived. Didn't see anything directly, but her call was what got us to the scene in time to preserve evidence. Sarah nodded, but something nagged at her. Rex had settled down now, but she could still feel the tension in his body like a coiled spring waiting for the right trigger. Webb, in all the time you've known us, has Rex ever been wrong about someone? Webb considered this carefully. Rex's record spoke for itself. Dozens of successful drug seizures, 3 missing children found alive, 2 suspects apprehended while fleeing crime scenes. The dog's instincts were legendary throughout the department. No, Webb said finally. I don't think he has. As if summoned by their conversation, Captain Janet Morrison appeared at Sarah's desk, her expression unreadable. Morrison was a tough, fair commander who'd earned respect the hard way, working her way up through patrol detective work and administration. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. Chen, I just got off the phone with Judge Hawthorne. She's not happy about the disruption in her courtroom today. I know, Captain, I'm sorry about that. Rex has never... Morrison held up a hand. I'm not here to discipline you. Your record speaks for itself, and so does Rex's. But I am curious. What set him off? Sarah found herself explaining the whole incident again, watching Morrison's face for any sign of judgment or dismissal. Instead, she saw something that surprised her. Interest. This witness, Pemberton, Morrison said when Sarah finished. What did you think of her when you interviewed her during the investigation? Sarah had to think back. Eleanor Pemberton had been one of dozens of witnesses they'd spoken to in the weeks following Janet Williams' murder. She seemed nervous, I guess. But most people are nervous when they're talking to police about a murder. She was cooperative, answered all our questions, never changed her story. But, Morrison prompted, but Rex didn't meet her during the investigation. I interviewed her alone while he was getting his monthly vet checkup. Today was the first time they'd been in the same room. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah could almost see the wheels turning behind her eyes. Finally, the captain spoke. Chen, I want you to take another look at the Pemberton interview. Go through her statement line by line, check her background again, see if anything jumps out at you. Captain, the case is closed. Williams was convicted. The case may be closed. But my faith in Rex's instincts isn't. Morrison's voice carried the weight of hard-earned experience. I've been in this job for 25 years, and I've learned to trust when a good cop or a good dog tells me something's not right. Spend a couple hours on it. If you don't find anything, we'll chalk it up to courtroom stress and move on. As Morrison walked away, Sarah looked down at Rex. The dog's ears were perked forward and his tail gave a single, hopeful wag. What do you know that we don't, boy? She whispered. Rex's answer was to stand up and walk to the filing cabinet where they kept cold case files, his nose working the air with renewed interest. Sarah Chen had learned long ago to trust her partner's instincts. It was time to find out what Rex was trying to tell her. Portland Police Bureau, Evidence Room, 6:47 p.m. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like angry wasps as Sarah spread Eleanor Pemberton's witness file across the metal table. Rex lay beside her chair, but his usual relaxed posture was absent. Every few minutes his head would lift and his nostrils would flare, as if he were tracking a scent that existed only in memory. Okay, let's see what we missed, Sarah muttered, pulling on latex gloves before handling the evidence photos. Eleanor Pemberton, age 54, had lived next door to Marcus and Janet Williams for 7 years. Divorced, no children, worked as a night shift nurse at Portland General until her retirement 6 months before the murder. Clean background check, no criminal history, no outstanding debts or legal troubles. On paper, she was the perfect witness, reliable, observant, and credible. But as Sarah read through Pemberton's statement for the 3rd time, small inconsistencies began to surface like oil on water. Pemberton claimed she'd been awakened by terrible screaming at approximately 11 p.m. on the night of the murder. She'd looked out her bedroom window but couldn't see anything unusual, so she called 911. The call log confirmed the time. 11:03 p.m. Officers arrived at 11:17 p.m. and found Janet Williams' body in the living room, with Marcus Williams sitting beside her, covered in blood and claiming he'd just returned from a business dinner to find her dead. But here's what bothered Sarah. If Pemberton had been asleep when the screaming woke her, how had she been so precise about the time? Her statement said she looked at the clock immediately after being awakened, but most people weren't that organized when jolted from sleep by sounds of violence. Sarah pulled up the 911 recording on her laptop and listened to it again, Rex's ears perking up at the sound of Pemberton's voice. 911, what's your emergency? Yes, I need police at 1247 Elm Street. I think someone's being hurt. There's been terrible screaming coming from the house next door. Ma'am, are you still hearing the screaming? No, it stopped a few minutes ago. But it was awful, like someone was dying. Are you in a safe location? Yes, I'm in my own house. But please, you need to send someone. Something terrible has happened over there. The call lasted 3 minutes and 47 seconds. Pemberton had sounded genuinely distressed, her voice shaking with what appeared to be fear and concern. But listening to it now, with Rex's courthouse behavior fresh in her mind, Sarah caught something she'd missed before. Background noise. During the call, there was a faint sound in the background, so quiet that the original investigators had dismissed it as ambient noise. But with enhanced audio software, Sarah could make out what sounded like movement, shuffling, as if Pemberton wasn't sitting still during the call, but walking around, maybe looking out windows. Detective Chen? Sarah jumped, nearly knocking over her coffee. Officer Tommy Reeves stood in the doorway, his young face creased with concern. Sorry to startle you. Captain Morrison asked me to check on you. It's past 8 o'clock. Sarah glanced at her watch, surprised. She'd been at this for over an hour and hadn't noticed the time passing. Rex stretched and yawned, a reminder that they'd both been working since dawn. Thanks, Tommy. We're just wrapping up here. But Reeves didn't leave. Instead, he stepped closer to the table, his eyes drawn to the evidence photos spread across its surface. This is the Williams murder case, right? I heard Rex caused some excitement in court today. Word travels fast. It does when Judge Hawthorne calls the chief to complain about undisciplined animals disrupting justice. Reeves grinned. But everyone knows Rex doesn't act up without reason. What's got him spooked? Sarah was about to dismiss the question with a standard non-answer when Rex suddenly stood up, his body rigid with attention. The dog was staring at the doorway behind Reeves, a low growl building in his throat. What is it, boy? Sarah followed Rex's gaze but saw nothing except the empty hallway beyond. That's when she heard the footsteps. They were soft, cautious, as if someone were trying not to be heard. Sarah motioned for Reeves to be quiet as the footsteps grew closer. Rex's growl intensified, and Sarah felt the familiar chill of adrenaline flooding her system. A shadow fell across the doorway, and Eleanor, Pemberton, stepped into view. She looked different than she had in court, older somehow, more fragile. Her grey wool coat had been replaced by a dark blue jacket, and her usually perfect hair was disheveled, but it was her eyes that caught Sarah's attention. They were wide with what looked like panic, darting between Sarah, Reeves, and the evidence, spread across the table. Mrs. Pemberton, Sarah said carefully, her hand instinctively moving to Rex's collar as the dog's hackles rose. What are you doing here? I came to see you. Pemberton's voice was barely above a whisper. About what happened in court today with your dog. Ma'am, visiting hours ended at 6, Reeves interjected, his hand moving toward his radio. You shouldn't be in the building without an escort. Pemberton's eyes flicked to Reeves, then back to Sarah. Please, I need to talk to you. About the case, about what he did today. Rex's growl had become a constant rumble now, and Sarah could feel the tension in his body like a live wire. Whatever had triggered his behavior in the courtroom was happening again. Right. Here in the evidence room. Mrs. Pemberton, how did you get into the building? Sarah asked, standing slowly. Standard protocol required all civilian visitors to be logged in and escorted by an officer. The door was open, Pemberton said quickly. The security guard stepped away for a moment, and I needed to see you. It was a lie. Sarah knew. Reeves knew it, and Rex's body language confirmed it. The main entrance to the police bureau was never left unattended, and civilian access to the evidence room required multiple security clearances. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me," Reeves said, stepping forward with professional calm. "We need to verify your identity and—" Pemberton bolted. She spun around and ran for the hallway with surprising speed for a woman her age. Reeves shouted after her, but Sarah was already moving, Rex surging forward on his lead as they gave chase. The pursuit was brief, but chaotic. Pemberton made it halfway down the hallway before Rex's superior speed and Sarah's longer stride caught up with her. But it wasn't Sarah who stopped the fleeing woman, it was Rex himself. The dog planted himself directly in Pemberton's path, not aggressively but with absolute determination. She tried to dodge around him, but Rex moved with her, blocking her escape route without making contact. It was a textbook canine containment maneuver, executed with the precision of years of training. "Please," Pemberton gasped, backing against the wall as Reeves caught up with them. "You don't understand your dog. He knows something. Something that could destroy everything." Sarah stared at the terrified woman, Rex still positioned between Pemberton and any possible escape route. The dog's behavior had gone beyond professional duty. This was personal, instinctive, the same way he'd reacted to the scent of Sarah's internal bleeding after the IED explosion. Rex was trying to save someone. The question was, who? "Mrs. Pemberton," Sarah said quietly, "I think it's time you told us the truth about what happened the night Janet Williams died." The older woman's face crumpled, and for a moment, Sarah thought she was going to confess everything. But then, Pemberton's expression hardened, and when she spoke, her voice carried an edge of desperation that made Sarah's skin crawl. "You don't know what you're asking," Pemberton whispered. "Some truths are too dangerous to tell. Some secrets are worth killing for." Rex's growl intensified, and Sarah realized with cold certainty that they weren't just looking at a witness anymore. They were looking at someone who knew exactly how Janet Williams had really died, and why Marcus Williams, currently sitting in a prison cell for a murder he might not have committed, had been the perfect scapegoat. Portland Police Bureau. Interview. Room 2, 9:23 p.m. Eleanor Pemberton sat across from Sarah and Detective Webb, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. Rex lay in the corner of the small room, but his position wasn't relaxed. He was watching Pemberton with the focused intensity of a predator studying prey. "Mrs. Pemberton," Webb began, his voice carrying the practiced calm of 2 decades of interrogations, "you've been read your rights and you've declined an attorney. We appreciate your cooperation." Pemberton nodded, but didn't speak. Her eyes kept darting to Rex, as if the dog were a loaded weapon that might go off at any moment. Sarah leaned forward. "In court today, Rex reacted to you in a way I've never seen before. In 8 years of partnership, he's never shown that kind of focused aggression toward an innocent witness. Maybe your dog is just old," Pemberton suggested weakly. "Animals can become unpredictable as they age. Rex is 7 years old and in perfect health," Sarah replied. "But let's talk about something else. How did you get into the police station tonight?" Pemberton's story had already changed twice. First, she claimed the security door was propped open. Then she said she'd followed another visitor inside. Now, faced with Webb's patient but relentless questioning, she fell silent entirely. "Here's what we know," Webb said, opening a folder. "Our security cameras show you entering the building at 8:15 p.m. through the rear maintenance entrance. That door requires a security code that only department personnel possess. Care to explain how you obtained that information?" For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the hum of fluorescent lights and Rex's steady breathing. Then Pemberton looked up, and Sarah saw something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Fear. But not of them. Of something else entirely. "You don't understand," Pemberton said finally. "I didn't come here to cause trouble. I came here to—" "Warn you?" "Warn us about what?" Sarah asked, About reopening the Williams case, about what your dog might uncover. Webb and Sarah exchanged glances. They hadn't told anyone outside the department about Morrison's instruction to take another look at Pemberton's testimony. Mrs. Pemberton, how did you know we were reviewing the case? Webb's voice had taken on a sharper edge. Pemberton's composure finally cracked. Because he told me you would. He said dogs like Rex don't forget, and eventually someone would start asking questions. He? Sarah leaned forward. Who is he? Instead of answering, Pemberton reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph. It was old, faded around the edges, showing a group of people at what appeared to be a hospital Christmas party. Pemberton was there, looking perhaps 10 years younger, wearing scrubs and smiling at the camera, but it was the man standing next to her that made Sarah's blood run cold. Dr. Richard Hastings, the medical examiner who had performed Janet Williams' autopsy. How do you know Dr. Hastings? Webb asked, though his tone suggested he was already forming his own theories. We worked together at Portland General for 15 years, Pemberton said, her voice barely above a whisper. Before he moved to the medical examiner's office, before I retired. Sarah studied the photograph more carefully. Hastings and Pemberton weren't just colleagues in the photo. They were standing close together, his hand on her shoulder, both of them smiling with an intimacy that suggested a relationship beyond professional courtesy. You were involved, Sarah said. It wasn't a question. Pemberton nodded miserably. For 3 years. His wife never knew. My ex-husband never knew. We were very careful, very discreet. But when Richard got the job as chief medical examiner, we ended it. Too risky, he said. Too much potential for conflict of interest. Webb was already pulling up Hastings' file on his laptop. But you stayed in contact. Christmas cards, birthday calls, nothing romantic, just friendship. Until 6 months ago. What happened 6 months ago? Sarah asked. I was diagnosed with early-stage dementia. Pemberton's voice broke slightly. Mild cognitive impairment, the doctors called it. Not severe yet, but getting worse. I had to retire from nursing. I had to start thinking about what would happen to me. Rex stirred in his corner, lifting his head as if sensing the emotional shift in the room. Sarah felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to click together. But the picture they formed was too dark to fully comprehend yet. Richard was the only person I told, Pemberton continued, about the diagnosis, about my fears. He was so kind, so understanding. He said he'd help me through it, that I wouldn't have to face it alone. And then Janet Williams was murdered, Webb said quietly. Pemberton nodded. Richard called me the morning after the body was discovered. He said there might be a problem with the case, that the evidence wasn't as clear-cut as the police thought. He needed a favor. Sarah felt sick. He asked you to lie. He asked me to call 911, Pemberton said, tears streaming down her face now. To say I'd heard screaming from the Williams house, to provide a witness account that would support the timeline. The police were building. The room fell silent except for the sound of Pemberton's quiet sobbing. Sarah looked at Rex, who was now sitting upright, his amber eyes fixed on the broken woman across the table, with something that looked almost like compassion. Mrs. Pemberton, Webb said gently, what really happened the night Janet Williams died? I don't know, Pemberton whispered. I swear to you I don't know. Richard never told me the details. He just said that Marcus Williams was guilty and that my testimony would help ensure justice was served. But you believed him, Sarah said. I loved him, Pemberton replied simply, and I was scared. The dementia diagnosis, the future. Richard promised he'd take care of me if I helped him. He said we could be together again, that we'd both be retired soon and no one would question an old couple spending their golden years together. Sarah stood up and walked to the small window that looked out over the city. Portland's lights twinkled in the darkness, each one representing lives that depended on law enforcement officers like her to seek truth and protect the innocent. How many other cases had been compromised by personal relationships and hidden agendas? Mrs. Pemberton, she said without turning around, do you still have the security code that let you into the building tonight? Richard gave it to me, Pemberton admitted. He said if I ever needed to reach the police quickly, if anyone ever questioned my story about the Williams case, I should use it to get to you directly. Webb's laptop chimed with an incoming message. He read it, his face growing grim. "Sarah, we have a problem." She turned back to the table. "What is it?" "I just ran a background check on Dr. Hastings' finances. 3 weeks after the Williams murder, trial ended. He made a $50,000 deposit into a private account. Source listed as consulting fees." Sarah felt the room spin slightly. Consulting fees from who? Webb's fingers flew over the keyboard. "Give me a minute." "Okay, here it is. The payment came from Pinnacle Insurance Group." The name hit Sarah like a physical blow. "That's Marcus Williams' company. He was an insurance adjuster for Pinnacle." Rex was on his feet now, pacing in the small space, his agitation palpable. The dog's instincts had been trying to tell them something from the moment he saw Eleanor Pemberton in that courtroom, and now the truth was beginning to emerge like a photograph developing in chemical solution. "Mrs. Pemberton," Sarah said, her voice tight with controlled anger, "I need you to think very carefully. Did Dr. Hastings ever mention anything about insurance money? About a life insurance policy on Janet Williams?" Pemberton's face went pale. "How did you answer the question?" He said the case was more complicated than it looked, that there were financial motives involved, but he never said Marcus Williams was innocent. He said Marcus was guilty and that my testimony would help prove it. Webb was already pulling up insurance records. Janet Williams had a $500,000 life insurance policy through Pinnacle Insurance Group. Beneficiary was her husband, Marcus Williams. But here's the interesting part. The policy was taken out just 18 months before her death. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. If Marcus Williams had been innocent, if someone else had killed his wife, then the life insurance money would never be paid out. The case would remain open, and Pinnacle would save $500,000. But if Marcus was convicted of murder, the case was closed, and no one would ever look deeper into the circumstances of Janet Williams's death. "Oh my God," Pemberton whispered, her face a mask of horror as the same realization dawned on her. Richard didn't want justice. He wanted Marcus Williams convicted to cover up the real murder. Rex barked once, sharp and urgent, as if confirming her statement. Sarah stared at the broken woman across the table, feeling the weight of a terrible injustice settling on her shoulders. Marcus Williams had been sitting in prison for 3 months, convicted of a murder he didn't commit, while the real killer walked free. And Dr. Richard Hastings, the man entrusted with speaking for the dead, with finding truth in the silence, toy of the grave, had sold that truth for $50,000. "Mrs. Pemberton," Sarah said quietly, "we need you to tell us everything. Every conversation, every phone call, every detail you can remember, because an innocent man is in prison, and a murderer is still out there." Pemberton nodded through her tears. "I'll tell you everything, but Sarah, Detective Chen Ati, what? Richard knows about your dog. He knows Rex was trying to expose me in that courtroom, and if he's desperate enough to frame an innocent man for murder—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Rex moved closer to Sarah's chair, his body warm and solid against her leg. The dog who had saved her life in Afghanistan, who had helped her rebuild herself after war and trauma, was now trying to save someone else, Marcus Williams. But first, they had to survive long enough to prove his innocence. Dr. Richard Hastings' home, West Hills, Portland, 1147. The medical examiner's house sat on a quiet cul-de-sac, its Tudor-style architecture blending seamlessly with the other upscale homes in the neighborhood. From the outside, it looked like the residence of a respected professional, well-maintained landscaping, expensive cars in the driveway, warm light glowing from the windows. It looked like the home of someone who had never betrayed the sacred trust of his profession. Sarah and Webb sat in their unmarked patrol car, Rex alert in the back seat, watching as shadows moved behind the curtains of the living room. They'd called for backup 20 minutes ago, but Captain Morrison had ordered them to wait for additional units before approaching. A corrupt medical examiner with access to forensic evidence and inside knowledge of police procedures was potentially as dangerous as any armed suspect. Movement in the kitchen, Webb observed, adjusting his binoculars. "Looks like he's on the phone." Sarah's radio crackled. "Unit 47, this is Morrison. What's your status? Still in position, Captain. Subject appears to be home. No sign of Eleanor. Pemberton. Copy that. Backup units are 2 minutes out. Do not approach until they arrive. But as Morrison's voice faded, Sarah saw something that made her blood freeze. A figure was moving through the shadows in the backyard. Someone trying to reach the house without being seen from the street. Eleanor Pemberton. Webb, she's here, Sarah whispered, pointing toward the rear of the property. Pemberton just went. Round back, Webb cursed under his breath. She must have slipped out while we were processing her statement. Damn it, we should have kept her in custody. Rex whined softly from the back seat, his eyes fixed on the house. The dog's body language screamed danger, ears forward, muscles tense, every instinct telling him that something was about to go very wrong. Sarah's radio erupted with static, then Morrison's voice sharp with urgency. All units, we just intercepted a 911 call from the Hastings residence. Female voice said someone was trying to break in. Units 23 and 31 moved to intercept. Units 47 and 52 establish perimeter. Captain, that's Eleanor Pemberton, Sarah said into her radio. She's not breaking in. She's meeting with Hastings. They're co-conspirators. Negative, Chen. The call described an armed intruder. We treat this as a hostage situation until proven otherwise. But Sarah's instincts, honed by years of combat and police work, were screaming that something was wrong. Why would Pemberton call 911 to report herself, unless Dr. Richard Hastings' home, West Hills, Portland, 11:52 p.m., the gunshot shattered. The suburban quiet like breaking glass. Sarah was out of the patrol car before the echo faded, Rex's lead in one hand and her service weapon in the other. Webb was right behind her, radio squawking with urgent voices as backup units converged. On the scene. Shots fired. Shots fired at 2847 Cascade Drive. But as they approached the house, Sarah realized the sound hadn't come from inside. It had come from the backyard, where Eleanor Pemberton had disappeared into the shadows just minutes before. Rex was pulling hard on his lead, not toward the front door where protocol demanded they wait for backup, but around the side of the house toward the source of the gunshot. Every instinct Sarah had developed in 8 years of partnership told her to trust the dog's judgment. Webb, this way, she called softly, following Rex along the landscaped path that led to the backyard. What they found there would haunt Sarah for the rest of her career. Eleanor Pemberton lay crumpled on the brick patio, her grey coat dark with spreading blood. 20 feet away, Dr. Richard Hastings stood with a smoking revolver in his shaking hands, his face a mask of shock and horror. "Drop the weapon!" Webb shouted, his own gun trained on the medical examiner. "Drop it now!" Hastings looked up as if seeing them for the first time. The gun fell from his nerveless fingers and clattered across the bricks. "She was going to tell them everything," he whispered. "She was going to destroy us both." Rex strained toward Pemberton's still form, but Sarah held him back. The woman was clearly beyond help. The shot had taken her in the chest at close range, and the amount of blood told its own story. "Richard Hastings, you're under arrest for the murder of—" "Eleanor Pemberton," Webb began, but Hastings wasn't listening. He was staring at Rex with the same expression of recognition and fear that Pemberton had worn in the courtroom. "That dog," Hastings said, his voice barely audible. He knew. Somehow, he knew. Sarah approached cautiously, her weapon still drawn. "Knew what, Dr. Hastings? What did Rex know?" Instead of answering, Hastings laughed, a sound so hollow and broken that it made Sarah's skin crawl. "Do you want to know the funny part, Detective? Eleanor didn't even know the whole truth. She thought she was helping me frame Marcus Williams for something he actually did." "But he didn't do it," Sarah said. "You killed Janet Williams." "No." Hastings shook his head slowly. "No, I didn't kill Janet Williams either." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. If Hastings hadn't killed Janet Williams and Marcus Williams was innocent, then who? "She killed herself," Hastings continued, his voice gaining strength as the confession poured out of him. "Janet Williams committed suicide, but it wasn't just any suicide. It was staged to look like murder, designed to frame her husband and void his life insurance claim." Webb's radio crackled with updates from the arriving backup units, but Sarah barely heard them. Her entire focus was on the broken man standing in front of her, finally telling the truth after months of lies and cover-ups. Why would she do that? Sarah asked. Because she was dying, Hastings replied. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. She had maybe 3 months left, and she was going to die in agony. But if she committed suicide, the insurance wouldn't pay out. Her husband would get nothing, and she'd spent their entire savings on medical treatments that weren't working. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place now, creating a picture more complex and tragic than Sarah had imagined. So she staged her own murder. She was brilliant, Hastings said, and there was genuine admiration in his voice. A former nurse just like Eleanor, she knew exactly how to create the right pattern of injuries, the right crime scene evidence. She even timed it for when Marcus would be at his business dinner, surrounded by witnesses. But something went wrong, Webb interjected. Hastings nodded. The staging was too perfect. When I performed the autopsy, I could see what she'd done. The angle of the wounds, the blood spatter patterns, the defensive injuries that were just a little too precise. Janet Williams had studied forensic textbooks, had planned every detail. But she'd planned it too well. Anyone with my training would have spotted the inconsistencies eventually. Sarah felt sick. So you covered it up. Pinnacle Insurance offered me $50,000 to make sure the case went away quickly and quietly, Hastings said. If the truth came out, that Janet Williams had committed an elaborate suicide to defraud the insurance company, it would have triggered investigations into dozens of other cases. The company would have lost millions. And Marcus Williams became the perfect scapegoat, Webb said grimly. He was supposed to be acquitted, Hastings protested. The evidence I fabricated wasn't strong enough for a conviction. Any competent defense attorney should have been able to create reasonable doubt. But his attorney was inexperienced, Sarah realized. Timothy Brooks, fresh out of law school, assigned to a capital murder case. I didn't know that would happen, Hastings said, but his voice lacked conviction. I thought he'd be found not guilty. The insurance company would be satisfied that they'd done their due diligence, and everyone would move on. Rex suddenly pulled away from Sarah's grip, moving toward the house. The dog's behavior had shifted, again, no longer aggressive but urgent, as if he were tracking something important. What is it, boy? Sarah followed Rex to the sliding glass door that led into Hastings's kitchen. Through the transparent surface, she could see something that made her heart race. A laptop computer sitting open on the kitchen counter, its screen displaying what appeared to be email correspondence. Dr. Hastings, Sarah said slowly. Who else knows about this? About what really happened to Janet Williams? Hastings followed her gaze to the laptop and his face went white. No one. Just Eleanor and me. And now Eleanor's. His voice trailed off as the full implications hit him. If Eleanor Pemberton was dead and Hastings was about to be arrested, then the truth about Janet Williams' suicide would die with them. Marcus Williams would remain in prison for a crime that had never actually been committed, and the real victim, Janet Williams herself, would be remembered as a murder victim instead of a woman driven to desperate measures by terminal illness and financial ruin. Unless, Sarah said, pieces clicking together in her mind, someone else was involved. Someone who helped Janet Williams plan her suicide. Someone who knew enough about forensic evidence to guide her staging efforts. Rex barked once, sharp and insistent, still focused on the house. The laptop, Webb said, understanding dawning in his voice. There's evidence on the laptop. Through the kitchen window, they could see the computer screen more clearly now. It was displaying an email inbox, and even from a distance, Sarah could make out several messages with the subject line. JW Consultation. Dr. Hastings. Sarah said, her voice deadly quiet. Did you help Janet Williams plan her suicide? The medical examiner's silence was answer enough. You didn't just cover up the evidence after the fact, Webb continued. You were involved from the beginning. You helped her stage the crime scene, helped her create wounds that would look like murder, helped her die in a way that would implicate her husband. She was dying anyway, Hastings exploded. She was going to die in 3 months of the most horrible, painful death you can imagine. At least this way she got to choose how she went out, and Marcus would have been financially secure. Except, Marcus didn't kill her, so he shouldn't go to prison for it, Sarah shouted back. I told you he was supposed to be acquitted. But he wasn't. He was convicted and he's sitting in a prison cell right now for a murder that you helped stage. Rex barked again, more urgently this time. The dog was pacing in front of the sliding door, his behavior becoming increasingly agitated. Sarah looked more closely at the laptop screen and felt her blood freeze. Among the emails in the inbox, she could see one with a timestamp from just 20 minutes ago. The sender's name made her stomach lurch. Timothy Brooks, Marcus Williams' defense attorney. "Dr. Hastings," Sarah said slowly, "have you been in contact with Marcus Williams' lawyer?" Hastings' face crumpled completely. "He figured it out," he whispered. After the conviction, Brooks started having doubts about how badly he'd handled the case. He began reviewing the evidence, looking for grounds for an appeal. "And he found inconsistencies in your autopsy report," Webb concluded. "He contacted me 3 weeks ago. Said he knew what I'd done, knew about the insurance money. He wanted his cut, or he'd expose everything." Sarah felt the final piece of the puzzle click into place. Brooks threw the case deliberately. He knew his client was innocent, but he made sure Marcus Williams was convicted anyway so he could blackmail you later. $50,000 wasn't enough, Hastings said bitterly. Brooks wanted $100,000 to keep quiet, said he had student loans to pay off, and representing an innocent man on a murder charge had damaged his conscience enough that he deserved compensation. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder, and Sarah knew their time was running out. But there was still one thing she needed to understand. "Rex," she said, looking down at her partner, "how did you know? How did you know Eleanor Pemberton was lying?" As if in answer, Rex moved to a flower bed near the patio where Eleanor's body lay. He sat down and began pawing at the soil, uncovering something that glinted in the porch light. Sarah knelt beside him and carefully extracted what appeared to be a small digital recording device. "What is that?" Webb asked. Sarah pressed the play button, and Eleanor Pemberton's voice filled the night air. But it wasn't the voice of the frightened, confused woman they'd interrogated. It was clear, confident, and completely lucid. "Richard, I've done everything you asked. I called 911, I gave my statement to the police, I testified in court. But I want more money. $100,000 isn't enough for what you're asking me to do." Hastings' voice responded, "Eleanor, we agreed on $50,000. That was before I realized you were going to let an innocent man go to prison. My conscience is worth more than $50,000. The recording continued for several more minutes, revealing the full extent of the conspiracy. Eleanor Pemberton hadn't been a confused victim with dementia. She'd been a willing participant in the cover-up, manipulating her supposed cognitive decline to seem like a sympathetic witness, while secretly recording conversations for insurance. Rex had smelled the recording device on her during the court hearing. His instincts had recognized the scent of electronics, of hidden evidence, of deception. The dog who had been trained to detect explosives and drugs had adapted his skills to detect lies. "Jesus," Webb breathed. How many people were involved in this? Before Sarah could answer, the sliding glass door exploded outward in a shower of glass and wood. Timothy Brooks stood in the opening, a gun in his hand and madness in his eyes. "Nobody else is getting rich off my client's suffering," he snarled. "If I can't have the money, then everyone goes down together." Rex launched himself forward with a snarl that came from the depths of his soul, the same protective instinct that had saved Sarah's life in Afghanistan, now focused on saving the truth itself. The confrontation that followed would determine whether Marcus Williams would spend the rest of his life in prison for a crime that had never actually been committed. Dr. Richard Hastings' backyard, 1203. A.M. Rex's 90 pounds of muscle and fury collided with Timothy Brooks like a guided missile, sending the corrupt attorney sprawling across the brick patio. The gun flew from Brooks's hand and skittered across the ground, coming to rest near Eleanor Pemberton's still form. "Rex, hold!" Sarah commanded, her own weapon trained on Brooks as he struggled beneath the German shepherd's weight. The dog obeyed, instantly, pinning the attorney without inflicting injury. But his amber eyes burned with an intensity that promised swift retribution if Brooks moved so much as an inch. Brooks's face was twisted with rage and desperation. "You don't understand what you're destroying," he screamed. "Janet Williams was a fraud. She cheated the system, cheated her husband, cheated everyone." She was a dying woman who made a terrible choice, Sarah replied, advancing carefully toward the fallen gun. But that doesn't give you the right to let an innocent man rot in prison for it. Webb had his radio out, coordinating with the backup units that were now surrounding the property. We need EMTs for one deceased female and crime scene techs for multiple evidence locations. And get me a direct line to the district attorney's office. We're going to need to move fast on this. Dr. Hastings stood frozen against the wall of his house, watching the culmination of months of lies and corruption with the blank stare of a man whose world had just collapsed completely. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, he mumbled. Janet just wanted to die with dignity. Marcus was supposed to be freed. The insurance money was theft, Sarah cut him off, securing Brooks's weapon. And every day Marcus Williams spent in prison was a violation of everything we swore to uphold. Rex maintained his position over Brooks, but Sarah could see the dog's posture shifting slightly. His head was tilted, ears forward, as if he were listening to something the humans couldn't hear. That's when Sarah heard it too, the faint sound of sirens in the distance, but not the ones they'd called for backup. These were different. Ambulance sirens coming from the direction of downtown Portland. Her radio crackled with an emergency dispatch. All units, we have a situation at the state penitentiary. Inmate Marcus Williams has been found unconscious in his cell. Apparent suicide attempt, EMTs en route. Sarah felt the world tilt on its axis. No, she breathed. No, no, no. Brooks began laughing beneath Rex's restraining weight, a sound that was equal parts triumph and hysteria. Too late, he cackled. I called him an hour ago, told him his appeals had been rejected, that new evidence had been found that would guarantee he'd never get out. Guilty men don't deserve hope. Webb was already on his radio, trying to get updates from the prison, but Sarah was moving on pure instinct now. She sprinted toward their patrol car, Rex immediately at her side, understanding without words that their mission had taken on a new urgency. Sarah, wait, Webb called after her. The scene isn't secure. Then secure it, she shouted back. I'm not letting Marcus Williams die for a crime he didn't commit. As she reached the car, Sarah's radio erupted with Captain Morrison's voice. Chen, what's your status? We need you to maintain scene integrity until the investigators arrive. Captain, Marcus Williams is dying, Sarah said, starting the engine with Rex already jumping into the passenger seat. Brooks called him, told him his appeals were rejected. If Williams dies believing he's guilty of his wife's murder... I understand. Morrison's voice was grim but decisive. Go. Webb can handle the scene. But Sarah, you have maybe 20 minutes before Williams is transferred to the hospital. If you're going to save him, you need that confession on record. Sarah was already racing through the quiet streets, emergency lights flashing but siren silent. She needed to think, to plan, to figure out how to convince a man who had lost all hope that the truth was finally coming to light. Rex sat perfectly, still beside her, but she could feel his alertness, his understanding that they were racing not just against time, but against despair itself. Oregon State Penitentiary, Salem, Oregon, 1247. The corrections officer who met Sarah at the security checkpoint looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour. Officer Daniel Martinez had been working maximum security for 15 years, and Sarah could see in his eyes that he'd witnessed scenes that would haunt him forever. Williams is stable for now, Martinez said, as he led Sarah and Rex through the maze of secured corridors. We found him about 30 minutes after he tried to hang himself with bedsheets. EMTs got him breathing again, but he's refusing medical transport, says he won't go to the hospital, won't accept treatment. Is he conscious? Sarah asked. Yeah, but barely responsive. He just keeps saying he's sorry, that he deserves to die for what he did to his wife. Martinez's voice was heavy with frustration. In 15 years, I've never seen a man so convinced of his own guilt. They reached the medical wing, where Marcus Williams lay on a narrow cot, his neck bearing the raw marks of his suicide attempt. He looked smaller than Sarah remembered from the trial. Diminished, broken, a man who had been systematically destroyed by a system designed to protect him. But when Rex entered the room, something changed in William's eyes. The dog approached. The cot slowly, his demeanor completely different from the aggressive alertness he'd shown toward the conspirators. This was Rex in healing mode, the same gentle presence he'd provided to Sarah during her darkest moments with PTSD. "Marcus," Sarah said softly, pulling up a chair beside the cot. "My name is Detective Sarah Chen. This is my partner, Rex. We've been investigating your wife's death." Williams turned his head slightly, his voice barely a whisper. "Janet. I killed Janet. The jury said so. The evidence said so." "No, Marcus, you didn't kill Janet." For a moment, Williams's eyes focused with something like hope. Then the light faded again. "My lawyer called. New evidence, more proof. They're going to execute me." "Your lawyer lied to you," Sarah said, her voice gaining strength. "Timothy Brooks is under arrest right now for conspiracy and fraud. The evidence we found doesn't prove your guilt, it proves your innocence." Rex moved closer to the cot, resting his chin gently on the mattress near William's hand. The contact seemed to anchor the broken man, giving him enough stability to really hear Sarah's words. "That's not possible," Williams whispered. "Janet wasn't murdered, Marcus. She committed suicide, but she staged it to look like murder. She was dying of cancer, and she thought if she made it look like you killed her, you'd be acquitted, and the insurance money would help you rebuild your life." William's eyes widened, and for the first time since Sarah had entered the room, she saw a flicker of the man he'd been before the system destroyed him. "Cancer?" he breathed. "Janet she never told me she was sick." "She was trying to protect you," Sarah continued. "But the plan went wrong. People who were supposed to help ensure your acquittal took bribes to make sure you were convicted instead." Sarah pulled out her phone and played portions of the recording Rex had uncovered in Eleanor Pemberton's belongings. As Williams listened to the voices of Dr. Hastings and Timothy Brooks discussing their conspiracy, his face went through a transformation that was heartbreaking to witness. First confusion, then dawning understanding, then a grief so profound that Sarah had to look away. "She killed herself," Williams said finally, "to save me. And I couldn't even save her from the pain she must have been feeling." "You couldn't save her because she didn't give you the chance," Sarah said gently. "She made a choice, a terrible, misguided choice. But it was her. Joyce, you're not responsible for what happened to Janet." Rex had somehow managed to get his head onto the cot, and Williams was absently stroking the dog's ears with trembling fingers. The simple act of connection seemed to be bringing him back from the brink. "The insurance money," Williams said. "I never cared about the money. I just wanted Janet back." "I know," Sarah replied, "and now we're going to get you back. We're going to get you out of here, and we're going to make sure everyone knows the truth about what happened." Officer Martinez stepped forward. "Williams, you need medical attention. The EMTs are waiting outside." For the first time since Sarah had arrived, Marcus Williams smiled. It was a weak, fragile thing, but it was real. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I think I'd like to live long enough to see justice done." As the EMTs entered to prepare Williams for transport, Sarah felt Rex press against her leg. The dog's work here was done, not just detecting the truth, but helping a broken man find the strength to embrace it. But their mission wasn't over yet. Multnomah County Courthouse, Portland, Oregon, 8:30 a.m. The media circus outside the courthouse made Sarah's head spin. In the 12 hours since Marcus Williams' rescue and the arrests of Dr. Hastings and Timothy Brooks, the story had exploded across national news. Camera crews from CNN, Fox News, and every major network crowded the courthouse steps, while reporters shouted questions at anyone in a police uniform. "Detective Chen! Detective Chen! Is it true that a police dog exposed the conspiracy? How many innocent people are in prison because of corrupt medical examiners?" Sarah pushed through the crowd with Rex at her side, the dog's presence helping to create a small bubble of space around them. After the events of the previous night, Rex had become something of a celebrity, the K9 who had barked for justice and uncovered one of the most complex wrongful conviction cases in Oregon history. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was equally chaotic, but more controlled. District Attorney Rebecca Morse was holding an emergency press conference, explaining to a room full of reporters and legal professionals how her office had been deceived by falsified evidence and perjured testimony. "The charges against Marcus Williams are being dropped immediately," Morse announced, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Mr. Williams will be released from custody within the hour, and our office will be conducting a comprehensive review of every case that involved Dr. Richard Hastings' testimony over the past 5 years. Sarah slipped into the back of the courtroom, where the press conference was being held, Rex settling quietly beside her. She spotted Captain Morrison near the front, along with several other department heads and city officials. The political ramifications of the case were already becoming clear. Heads would roll, policies would change, and the entire criminal justice system would face scrutiny about how such a conspiracy had gone undetected for so long. Furthermore, D.A. Morse continued, "We will be working with the State Bar Association to investigate how Mr. Timothy Brooks was able to deliberately sabotage his client's defense while simultaneously planning to profit from that sabotage. This represents a betrayal of the attorney-client relationship that goes to the very heart of our legal system." A reporter in the front row raised her hand. "Ms. Morse, what role did the police dog play in uncovering this conspiracy?" Morse looked toward the back of the room, catching Sarah's eye. "Detective Chen and her K9 partner Rex will be available for questions after this conference. But I can tell you that without Rex's instincts and Detective Chen's willingness to trust those instincts, Marcus Williams might have died in prison for a crime he didn't commit." The weight of those words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Sarah could see it in the faces of the reporters, the lawyers, the court officials, the understanding that they had all been witness to something that challenged their fundamental assumptions about truth, justice, and the reliability of the systems they'd trusted. After the press conference, Sarah found herself in Judge Patricia Hawthorne's chambers, the same judge who had ordered Rex removed from the courtroom just 24 hours earlier. Judge Hawthorne looked like she'd aged. A decade since the trial, her usual stern composure replaced by something that looked almost like shame. "Detective Chen," Judge Hawthorne said, gesturing for Sarah to take a seat, "I owe you and your dog an apology. Your Honor, you were just trying to maintain order in your courtroom. I was letting my pride override my judgment," Judge Hawthorne interrupted. "In 30 years on the bench, I've learned to trust the instincts of experienced officers. I should have asked why your dog was reacting the way he was, instead of simply ordering him removed." Rex lay quietly beside Sarah's chair, but his ears perked up at the sound of his name. Judge Hawthorne looked down at him with something approaching awe. "May I ask," the judge continued, "how did he know? How did Rex understand that Eleanor Pemberton was lying when none of us humans could see it?" Sarah had been thinking about this question all morning. "I think it was a combination of things, Your Honor. Rex was trained to detect electronics and recording devices during his military service. When he smelled the hidden recorder that Pemberton was carrying, it triggered his alert response. But, more than that, Rex has always been able to sense when people are afraid, when they're hiding something. Pemberton wasn't just nervous about testifying, she was terrified about what would happen if the truth came out. And his reaction to Dr. Hastings? We haven't had a chance to test this theory yet, but I think Rex detected chemical traces from the crime scene on Hastings' clothing or skin. Remember, Hastings didn't just examine Janet Williams's body, he helped her stage the suicide. He would have had direct contact with the scene, and dogs can detect trace evidence that lingers for months. Judge Hawthorne shook her head slowly. A dog's nose was more reliable than our entire justice system. Not more reliable, Your Honor, just different. Rex couldn't tell us what was wrong, couldn't explain the evidence or build a case. All he could do was alert us that something needed investigation. The rest was still up to humans. A knock on the chamber door interrupted their conversation. Captain Morrison entered, followed by a man Sarah didn't recognize, tall, well-dressed, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "Detective Chen," Morrison said, "I'd like you to meet Commissioner Patricia Wells from the State Department. Of Justice. She's here to discuss the broader implications of this case." Commissioner Wells shook Sarah's hand, then looked down at Rex with undisguised curiosity. "Detective, I've been tasked with determining whether this case represents an isolated incident or part of a larger pattern of corruption. I understand your dog's behavior is what triggered the investigation that exposed the conspiracy. That's correct, Commissioner. I'm going to be frank with you, Wells continued. We've identified at least 12 other cases over the past 3 years where Dr. Hastings provided medical examiner services and large insurance payouts were involved. We need to know if Rex can help us identify which of those cases might warrant further investigation. Sarah felt a chill of understanding. You want to use Rex to review cold cases. We want to use every tool at our disposal to ensure that no other innocent people are sitting in prison cells while guilty parties walk free, Wells replied. If your dog's instincts are as reliable as they appear to be, he could help us identify cases that deserve a second look. Sarah looked down at Rex, who was watching the conversation with alert intelligence. The dog had already done more than anyone could have asked. He'd saved Marcus Williams' life, exposed a complex conspiracy, and challenged the entire criminal justice system to examine its assumptions. Commissioner, Sarah said slowly, Rex is a working dog, not a magic solution to systemic problems. His instincts are valuable, but they're just one tool among many. If we're going to prevent cases like this from happening again, we need better oversight, better training, and better systems for detecting corruption. Agreed, Wells nodded. But right now, Rex might be the key to finding other victims of this corruption before it's too late to help them. Judge Hawthorne spoke up from behind her desk. Detective Chen, I'm ordering the formation of a special task force to review questionable convictions involving Dr. Hastings' testimony. I'd like you and Rex to be part of that team. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Rex sensed her mood and pressed closer to her leg, offering the same steady support he'd provided through war, trauma, and recovery. We'll do whatever we can to help, Sarah said finally. As they left the courthouse, pushing through the crowd of reporters and cameras, Sarah reflected on how dramatically their lives had changed in just 24 hours. Rex was no longer just a K-9 officer. He was a symbol of the power of instinct over assumption, of truth over convenience. But more than that, he was a reminder that sometimes the most important voices in the pursuit of justice are the ones that can't speak in words. Portland General Hospital, 2:15 p.m. Marcus Williams looked like a different man than the broken figure Sarah had found in the prison medical wing just 14 hours earlier. The suicide attempt had left physical marks, bandages around his throat, exhaustion in his eyes. But there was something fundamentally changed about his posture, his expression, his entire presence. Hope. Detective Chen, Williams said as Sarah and Rex entered his hospital room. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me, Sarah replied, pulling up a chair beside his bed. Rex is the one who figured it out. I just listened to what he was trying to tell me. Rex approached the bed slowly, his demeanor gentle and calm. The aggressive alertness he'd shown toward the conspirators had been replaced by the same healing presence he'd offered to Sarah during her darkest moments. Williams reached out to scratch behind the dog's ears, and Sarah could see some of the trauma beginning to lift from his shoulders. The doctors say Janet was sick for at least 6 months before she died, Williams said quietly. 6 months of pain, of knowing she was dying, and she never said a word to me about it. She was trying to protect you, Sarah said. In her mind, she was giving you a future without the burden of watching her suffer. But I would have wanted to be there, William's voice cracked slightly. I would have wanted to help her through it, to be with her at the end. Instead, she died alone, terrified, believing that the only way to save me was to frame me for her murder. Rex rested his chin on the edge of the bed, offering silent comfort. The simple act of connection seemed to anchor Williams, giving him the strength to process emotions that had been buried under months of false guilt and despair. Mr. Williams, Sarah said gently, Janet made her choice based on what she thought was best. You can't blame yourself for not knowing something she deliberately hid from you. The insurance money, Williams continued, I never even wanted it. When the policy was denied after my conviction, I was almost relieved. How could I take money from Janet's death when I thought I was the one who killed her? Through the hospital room window, Sarah could see news vans still lined up outside, reporters waiting for any update on the case that had captivated the nation. But inside this quiet room, The real story was playing out. A man learning to forgive himself for tragedies he hadn't caused, for choices he hadn't made. "What happens now?" Williams asked. "Now you heal," Sarah replied. "The charges have been dropped, all records of your conviction are being expunged, and the state will be offering compensation for wrongful imprisonment. Dr. Hastings and Timothy Brooks will face trial for conspiracy, fraud, and in Hastings' case, murder. Eleanor Pemberton's role in the conspiracy died with her, but her recordings provided enough evidence to ensure justice will be served." Williams nodded, but Sarah could see he was struggling with something deeper than legal proceedings. "Detective," he said finally, "how do I live with this? How do I go on knowing that Janet died believing she was saving me, but instead, she was? Destroying both of us?" Rex lifted his head and looked directly at Williams, those amber eyes that had seen so much death and trauma, now offering something that transcended species: understanding, compassion, the promise that healing was possible, even after the worst betrayals of trust. "You live with it by honoring her memory in the right way," Sarah said. "Janet thought she was protecting you by lying. You can honor her by choosing to live honestly, openly, surrounded by people who care about you enough to share your burdens." Soft knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Captain Morrison entered, followed by District Attorney Rebecca Morse and a woman Sarah didn't recognize, middle-aged with kind eyes and the bearing of someone accustomed to helping others navigate crisis. "Mr. Williams," D.A. Morse said, "I'd like you to meet Dr. Lisa Harper. She's a trauma counselor who specializes in helping victims of wrongful conviction readjust to life after exoneration." Dr. Harper approached the bed with the same gentle confidence that Rex displayed when working with trauma victims. "Mr. Williams, what you've been through is more than anyone should have to endure. The state is committed to providing you with whatever support you need to rebuild your life." "I don't even know where to start," Williams admitted. "I lost my job, my house, most of my friends. Everyone believed I was a murderer." "We'll start slowly," Dr. Harper replied. "One day at a time, one decision at a time. The most important thing right now is that you're alive, you're free, and you have advocates who believe in your innocence." Captain Morrison stepped forward. "Mr. Williams, I want you to know that the Portland Police Bureau takes full responsibility for our role in this miscarriage of justice. We trusted the wrong people, failed to ask the right questions, and allowed political pressure to override proper investigative procedure." "Captain Morrison," Williams said, "you can't blame yourself for what happened. Your detective and her dog are the ones who saved my life." "But we should have caught it earlier," Morrison replied. "Rex's instincts shouldn't have been necessary to expose corruption in our own system." Sarah looked around the room at the assembled officials, police, prosecutors, counselors, all grappling with the ways their systems had failed, all committed to ensuring it wouldn't happen again. But her attention was drawn back to Rex, who had somehow managed to position himself where both she and Williams could touch him simultaneously. The dog who had survived war helped Sarah heal from trauma and exposed a conspiracy that nearly cost an innocent man his life was now doing what he did best: creating connections, building bridges between damaged souls who needed each other to heal. "Mr. Williams," Sarah said, "I know this isn't the right time and you need to focus on your recovery, but when you're ready, when you're stronger, I'd like you to consider something." "What's that?" "The task force that's being formed to review questionable convictions. We could use someone with your experience, someone who understands what it's like to be failed by the system, but also what it means to have that failure corrected." Williams was quiet for a long moment, absently stroking Rex's fur.